I welcome you all to the module 9. Module 9 is about social behavior, and today's lecture is lecture number 24, and it is titled as social influence. So we'll talk about three forms of social influence, that is conformity, compliance and obedience. So before we talk about today's lecture, let me give you a brief recap of the last lecture. So the last lecture was also part of the same module, that is social behavior, and in the last lecture we discussed the concept of attitude and its relationship with the behavior, how attitude influences behavior, under what conditions and so on, what are the components of attitude and so on. And also we discussed there are certain situations where behavior also influences your attitude and so on. So we have discussed all these possibilities. We also discussed certain theories in connection to all this relationship between attitude and behavior, such as cognitive dissonance theory, self-perception theory and so on. We also discussed the concept of persuasion and some of the theories related to persuasion, and at the end we discussed how some of these concepts of persuasion can be applied in the real world context. So these are some of the things that we discussed in the last lecture. In today's lecture we will focus on the specifically on the concept of social influence, how we get influenced by people around us, how our behavior changes when we are in a social situation or in the presence of other people. So there are three forms of social influence that we'll talk about in today's lecture. One is conformity, second is obedience, and the third one is compliance. So let's start today's lecture. So before we talk about specific forms of social influence, let us understand what is the meaning of social influence. So when we talk about social influence, it is a process by which an individual's thoughts, feelings or behaviors are changed or modified by the presence or actions of others. So basically social influence means whenever we are in a social situation, in the presence of other people or any social context, then our thoughts might change, our feelings might change, our behavior also may be modified or changed, simply because there are other people around us. So when a person is alone and when a person is in a social situation in presence of other peoples, there can be certain changes or influence of those social situation. That influence could change the thoughts, behaviors or feelings of an individual. So that's called social influence. How the presence of others influence our thought, our feelings, our behaviors and so on. So that's the general idea of social influence. And because we are social animals, our behavior, a lot of time, most of the time we are behaving in a social situations. So we are all the time influenced by the social context, the presence of other people and so on. So this is very important to understand how the social context, how presence of others actually influences us, and what are the different types of influences that we are under. So those all things we'll talk about here. So we are affected by social world around us, whether those influences are intentional, unintentional, whether others are physically present or merely imagined. Even when we imagine the presence of other people, that can be also counted as a social influence, because your response to your thoughts, your feelings and behaviors at that moment is in response to that imagined other people. So even if physically somebody is not there, but you are imagining someone else in a certain context and thinking or feeling or behaving, that means that imagined person is influencing you. So that is also actually included in the concept of social influence. So there are three major forms of social influence that we discussed in the social psychology. So and these three forms are of distinct levels of social influence, ranging from very subtle influence to very strong influence. So the first one is called as conformity. Conformity is a very subtle form of social influence. No one is telling you anything, but simply because you are in a situation, there are norms, there are certain expectations that you feel, I am expected of behaving in a certain situation, in certain ways. That expectation changes your behavior, or social norms changes your behavior. No one is telling you to do anything, but simply because of the situation, your understanding of the situations or the norms changes you. So it's a very subtle form of social influence. So we'll talk about that in detail. So that's called conformity. Then comes compliance, when somebody directly requests you to change your mind and thoughts and whatever it is. Somebody tells you, please buy this product. In an advertisement, it's a kind of compliance. Somebody will directly asking you, please do it for me, or please buy this product from me. For example, a salesman comes and tells you, please buy this product, this has these benefits and so on, whatever it is. So it's a direct request. So that's called compliance. Now here the influence is much more direct. The third form is obedience. Obedience happens when there is a command from an authority figure. Some authority figure tells you, there is a certain order coming. You have to do this because someone is in a higher position or authority, or you assume that person to be in the authority position. You follow that order. So it's very direct, much more stronger influence. So that's called obedience. So these three forms of social influence we'll talk one by one, and we'll try to understand how it influences us in and what are the manifestation of this. So the first one is conformity. So what is conformity? Conformity refers to change in the individual's beliefs, attitudes or behaviors in order to match the norms or expectations of a group. So whenever there is an expectation, there is no direct mention that you should behave like this or you should not do this or so on. Simply because there is an expectation, there is a norm that you learned that in this type of situation I should behave like this. So there is a norm already, you understand. Okay. So when you change your behavior or beliefs, attitudes, just to match the norms of the situation, norms of the social context, or certain expectation that you feel it is expected from me, you behave in a certain way, you change your behavior, your thoughts and feelings and so on. Then it is called as a conformity. So conformity is typically discussed in this context of when we change our behavior in a certain situations of where there is certain expectation or certain norms of behaving in a certain ways. So it occurs when people adjust their responses so that they are consistent with the majority or with the social expectation. Why people change themselves in whenever there is a certain norms or situations? Simply because they want to fulfill social expectations, because this is what is expected from you. If you want to live in a society harmoniously, then there is certain expectation of certain types of behavior in certain situations, so you try to fulfill those. So that indirect pressure is called conformity. So conformity occurs when people yield to real or imagined social pressure. So whenever there is a certain type of social pressure, and this pressure can be just imagined by you, or there can be real pressure because of the social norms, and when you yield to that pressure, that is called conformity. So it is kind of social gravity or a force that pulls individuals towards the norms, often occurring even when there is no direct request or order. Mostly in the context of conformity, there is no one is directly telling you do this or don't do this. It is because of this norms, there is a sense of gravity, or there is a force that pulls you in a certain types of behavior. Now we discussed persuasion in the last lecture. Persuasion is a more active attempt to change your mind. In the context of persuasion that we discussed, somebody is directly trying to change your mind. So that's a very more active. But conformity is often a passive internal process driven by the desire to fit in or kind of desire to be correct. Is more passive. No one is directly telling you, but passively you are doing it because of your whatever you think you are supposed to do in a social situation. So this is more of a passive kind of influence, more subtle and passive influence. Conformity is very common in our social world, and presence of others, expectations, social norms, all the time influences are, and that is why we behave as per the expectation of the society, as per the expectations of the social norms. It is because of this conformity only we are behaving rightfully, or in the right type of behavior we are showing in the various social context or situation. It is because of this conformity only. So let me give you some examples of conformity. For example, a student adopting similar desk style as their peer group. So you see, if you go to any college campus or someone, most of the student will be dressed in a very similar type of style. Why they are doing? Because it is expected. This is an acceptable dress in this context. So everybody follows that. No one is directly telling you to put certain specific type of dress, but very similar type of dress people will be wearing in a school, in a college, whatever it is, then it is because of this conformity. Okay? There is an expectation you should dress like this, so people are dressing like that. People clapping after a performance because everyone else is doing so. Many times, you may not feel like clapping, but everybody is clapping, you also clap. So that's because of this pressure of conformity. Individuals agreeing with group opinions during discussion even if they privately disagree. Many times in a group discussion, somebody agrees with the group, but privately they may not agree, simply because this pressure of conformity. They don't want to be left alone or somebody very different, so they just stick with the group. So it is because of this pressure of conformity. So conformity helps maintain social harmony and group cohesion. So one of the advantage of conformity is that because of this conformity, there is a group cohesion, people stick to each other, and there is a group harmony. Whenever people are in a group are in the same page, it is because of this conformity only. But it may also have many negative impact also, because of the conformity can lead to poor decisions or suppression of individual judgment. Because of this conformity, many times people take decisions which are not right, because everybody wants to be on the same page. So even if somebody feels it is not right, they are not saying it, and you take a decision and later it is found to be not the right kind of decision. So individual judgment, individual minority opinions are always left out because of the conformity. So it has certain advantages and also disadvantages. One of the classic study that shows this pressure of conformity, how people get influenced by this conformity. This was done by Solomon Asch. This is very popularly called as line study. So this was one of the very earliest study that shows the pressure of conformity and how people change to this or yield to this pressure of conformity. Solomon Asch showed participant a target line and 3 comparison lines, just like this. So there is a target line and there are 3 comparison line, and the participants are supposed to tell this which of this ABC line, this target line is same as which one out of this ABCD. So they have to kind of match. This is a kind of matching exercise. However, so they are asked them to identify which comparison line match the target. Among this ABC line, which one matches with the target line. So that was the task that is given. But there was a twist. What was the twist? The participant was in a room full of confidants. Oh, these are like actors who were instructed to give a wrong answer unanimously. So this task was given, and there was a room where all the other people, except there was a participant, all the other people were actors put by the experimenter, and they were instructed that you give a wrong answer. All of you give unanimously wrong answer. Okay, so there was a pressure of conformity was created artificially, and then they are trying to find out how the actual participant who was unaware that these are actors behave in that situation. What was the result? Asch find that about 75% of the participant conformed and gave the wrong answer at least once, simply because the rest of the group did. Very interestingly, what he found, even knowingly they were clearly saying which line matches with the target line, still they gave a wrong answer, simply because all the other people in the room were giving unanimously saying the wrong answer. They simply just conformed because they thought if so many people are saying, probably they are right. So there was a pressure to conform. So 75% of the participant actually conformed to this situation. So this very clearly shows how this pressure of conformity can influence us. So the next question comes, why people conform? What is the reason behind it? Social psychologists identify 2 main reasons for this conformity. One is called as normative social influence, that is the desire to be liked, and the second is informational social influence, the desire to be right. So desire to be liked and desire to be right. These 2 motivation leads people to conform to a situation. What are these 2? Let us little bit elaborate on these 2 causes. The first one is normative social influence. Whenever everybody are saying something, so it creates a norm. So people conform to gain approval and avoid rejection from others. When all the other people are saying something, if you say something different, you feel like I will be rejected from that group. I may not get approval of this group. So you want to be liked by the group. So this desire to be liked you conform to the norms of the group. So that's called normative social influence. So people conform to gain approval and avoid rejection. Therefore, many times people knowingly or unknowingly yield to the pressure of social conformity. Humans have a strong need for social acceptance and belonging, so they often follow group norms, because everybody has a very strong desire within all of us to be accepted and to belong to a group. You can only belong to a group when you kind of follow all the norms, otherwise you will be left out. So people often follow group norms just to be liked by the group members, to be accepted by the group members, and so that you can belong to that group. This desire leads people to conform to social pressures. For example, a person agreeing with a group's opinion in a meeting to avoid being criticized. You simply just agree to something, but privately you may not agree actually, just to avoid criticism or just to belong to that group. So that's called normative social influence. Then comes informational social influence. So that is the desire to be right. You want to be right. No one wants to be wrong in a situation. So people conform because they believe the group has more accurate information, especially in uncertain situations. Especially when there is some kind of uncertainty, you are not very sure, then people tend to go with the majority decisions, because you are also not very sure. You think if a lot of people are saying something, it must be right, so I should go along with that. So that desire that you don't want to be wrong, so you want to be right, so you go with the majority of the decisions, majority of the people. So people conform because they believe the group has more accurate information, because so many people are saying this, so they may have information. So you may not be very sure, so you go with the group. So this desire to be right is another reason why people conform to the social pressure. Example, when unsure about directions, people may follow what the majority does. Let's say a group of people are going and you are not very sure which direction to follow. You see majority of people are going in this direction, you will just follow them. You think because so many people are going, they must be right. So that is another reason why people conform to the social pressure. So now conformity is not same in every situation. There are many contextual factors which can influence this conformity. Not in every situation people will conform equally. So there are many other factors that can influence this conformity. One factor is group size. Conformity research shows conformity increases as the group size increases, but only up to a certain point. So as the group size increases, generally because the pressure of conformity may also increase, but it is not like unlimitedly as the group size increases. It's not like very linearly going like this, but up to a certain point, as the group size increases, pressure of conformity increases for other people. So research shows conformity increases rapidly up to 3 to 5 people. So up to 5 people, if the group size is increasing up to 5 people, the conformity is very strong, pressure for conformity. Beyond that, additional number may not have very strong role to play in terms of building pressure. Okay? So that is what social psychological research shows. So this is another, group size will matter whether people conform or not, to what extent the pressure of conformity is there. Second is unanimity. Conformity is strongest when the group is unanimous, means when all the members of a group are in one page, like they are saying same thing, everybody is saying same thing. So if there is someone in that group who doesn't even agree with that, but the pressure of conformity is very strong because everybody is on the same page, you are the only one who is left out, so you are more likely to conform because the pressure is very strong, because everybody is unanimous. Even if one person disagree, conformity drops. So let's say there is a group discussion, everybody is agreeing on something, then it is very difficult to go against them, so the pressure is very strong. But let's say even if one person stands up and says something very different, then conformity drops. Then other people who have some doubts may also start saying something. So disagreement of 1 or 2 people also kind of drop, that leads to drops in the conformity. So for example, in the Ash experiments, the presence of single dissenting partner greatly reduced conformity. So in that experiment, what they did this various version of that experiment, when even one person dissented or said something that this is wrong answer, then the actual participant actually had more courage to say that this is wrong. So, conformity drops. The third factor is cohesion. Cohesion means people conform more when they feel strongly connected to the group. Whenever there is a liking among group or connection among the group members are very strong. So, if someone says something, then you also tend to go with that other person because you like each other more in that group. So, people conform more when they are strongly connected to the group. There is a strong liking among each other in the group, then conformity is strongest. So, high group cohesion increases the desires to maintain group harmony. So, it depends on what is the composition of the group. If group members are all going here and then, obviously then conformity pressure will be less, but if everybody are of the same page, similar type of mindset, then the pressure of conformity is stronger. 4. The status of the group, that also influences conformity. Groups perceived as important, prestigious or expert exert stronger influence. So, if a group is composed of lot of expert people in a certain context, so they all are expert, important, prestigious people, then obviously the pressure is very strong, because all the expert are saying something, then it is very difficult to go against their ideas. So, people, for example, people may conform more to opinions expressed by professionals or authority figures. So, if in a group somebody is an authority or expert, if that person says something, other also find it difficult to go against that, simply because of the status of the member of that group. So, there are also influences. Then comes the fifth factor, public versus private response. In what is the format of your response? Where you are giving your response? Is it in the public, in front of other people, or is it privately, you are privately giving? There are also influences. So, conformity increases when response are public rather than private. Whenever you are supposed to express your opinion in the public's domains, in the presence of other people, then the pressure of conformity is very strong, because then everybody is looking at you and everybody is judging you. So, the pressure is more. But let us say you are asked to give your opinion anonymously, no one will know who gave this opinion, then obviously you will say what you actually feel like saying, not because of conformity. Conformity pressure will be least there. So, private responses allow individuals to express their true opinion without fear of social judgment, and then the pressure is less. So, these are some of the factors which will influence conformity pressure. So, it is not every situation will have same pressure of conformity, depending on all these contexts or contextual factors, the pressure may increase or decrease. So, as we also said that there are pros and cons of conformity in social life, it has benefits, it has problems also, as we already said. But positive effects, let us look into positive effects. As we already said, that it promotes social harmony and coordination. It is because of conformity people come together collectively and do something collectively as a group. It is because of this conformity only, otherwise it will be very difficult to do anything as a group. So, it creates social harmony, coordination, people collectively come together and do something because of this conformity pressure only. Conformity helps maintain social norms. So, whenever there are certain rules and norms to behave in a certain ways, we all follow. So, that helps to maintain those social norms, otherwise it will be very difficult to maintain social norms. Then conformity facilitates cooperation in group. It is because of conformity people cooperate with each other. So, these are the positive effects of conformity. Now, it has also some certain negative effects. It can suppress independent thinking, because everybody, if you follow others and just follow what others are saying, your independent thinking will be suppressed. You may not like what others are doing, you may have your own independent thinking, but because of the pressure of conformity, the person, any person may not express those independent thinkings because of the pressure of conformity. So, that is one of the problem with the conformity. Another thing is that it may lead to groupthink. Groupthink is a phenomena that we will discuss also, which when a group prioritize this consensus, that they prioritize that everybody should come on the same page and take a decision very quickly, and because of this pressure people many times take wrong decisions, sometimes irrational decisions. So, that is called groupthink, and it happens because of this pressure of conformity. So, there is also another problem. Conformity can result in harmful collective behavior. A lot of collective group behaviors are very dangerous and harmful, and this happens primarily because of this pressure of conformity. Many times individually people are very good, very decent and gentle in human beings, but let us say they are in a group and the group is doing something destructive. You may find that same individual who is very good and gentle is involved in a very destructive act of destructions or killings and so on. Many times lot of these people are actually individually, when you see them, they may not be that bad, but when they are in a group, the pressure of group, others are doing, you have to do it. Many people get engaged into a lot of these actions which may not be right, which may be destructive. So, a lot of this collective behavior, group behavior which are destructive, a lot of people do it because of this pressure of conformity. So, this has many negative impacts also. So, this is about conformity. So, the pressure is subtle, no one is directly telling you, but because of this subtle pressure, people change their behavior, change their thoughts and feelings and so on. The next is obedience, which is more direct and more stronger social influence, because somebody is directly telling you to do something. So, it is not like unwritten rule, it is like clearly told you that you have to do something. So, it is more like order giving. So, obedience means what? Obedience is a form of social influence where an individual acts in response to a direct order. So, this is very important. Here is a direct order from another individual, usually an authority figure. Somebody who is in an authority position and directly gives you an order, you do this or you have to do this, then there is a very strong influence. You have to do it because somebody is in an authority position, you are most likely to do that behavior. So, that influence is called obedience. People obey authority figures and the orders of the authority figure. So, that is called obedience. Now, obedience, it is about complying with orders of or instructions from an authority figure. It occurs when individuals changes behavior because someone with the perceived authority tells them to do so. Someone may be actual authority or maybe you perceive their authority. That is also important. So, in your mind that person is an authority figure and that person says something, you follow that or comply with that. That is the whole situation of obedience. So, it is very strong and direct as compared to conformity that we discussed. One of the classic study and a controversial study done in the context of obedience was Milgram's experiment in 1963. It is still one of the classic study, but it has a controversial part because of certain ethical issues that are there in the experimental design itself. So, let us look into this experiment and try to find out to what extent people yield to the obedience. So, this is one of the most famous and controversial study on obedience was conducted by Stanley Milgram of Yale University. He wanted to understand how far people would go in obeying an instruction from which involves harming others of another person. He was trying to see to what extent people will go when an authority figure gives you an order and to the extent that the order is harmful to another individual, to what extent people will actually obey. So, that was the main objective of the experiment. How did he do that? What was the method of doing this one? So, the participants, whoever was recruited for the experiment, they believed that they were taking part in a study of learning and memory. So, they were asked, this is an experiment that we are doing where what we are trying to test is the concept of learning and memory. When you learn something, to what extent you can report that in terms of memory. So, they were said something, but actually that was not the purpose. Purpose was something else. So, in psychological research context, this is called a deception method. You do not actually tell participant what is the actual objective of the study, because if the participant knows the actual objective of the experiment, they will not behave naturally. So, they are said something else, so that their mind will think, okay, this is what I am doing, but actually the experimenter is trying to measure something else. So, this is called deception. There are certain ethical issues, but we will not go into that part now. So, that was the thing. So, here participants were told they are involved in a study where there will be measurement of learning and memory. So, but actual experiment was designed in such a way that they were trying to see what is the level of obedience participant will show in terms of harming another individual. So, what was the role there in their participants? So, teacher. The actual participants were given the role of a teacher, means they have to check the performance of a other people. So, their role was teacher. Other people involved in the experiment were learners. Learners were basically confederate of the experimenter, means they were put by the experimenter with certain instructions. They are not actual participants. They are said, they were instructed to behave in a certain ways. So, they were not participants, they were just asked certain instruction and said that you behave like this as per the instruction. Actual participants were given the role of a teacher. So, that was the setup or method. So, what was the procedure? The teacher had to administer electric shocks to the learner whenever an incorrect answer was given. So, certain task was given, and if the learner who was actually not the participant, they were helper of the experimenter, whenever they gave wrong answer, the actual participant who was in the role of the teacher, they are supposed to give electric shock. There was no actual electric shock was given, but the participant believed they were giving electric shock to the participants as a punishment. So, that was what the setup was. And the condition was, after each successive mistake, the teacher was told to move to the next higher switch, higher level of shock, thereby increasing the apparent voltage. So, let us say the first mistake, you start with a very mild electric shock, another mistake you increase the electric shock, another mistake you increase further. So, that was the, so the shock level range from 15 volts to 450 volts. So, 450 volt is a fatal. Now, if it is given to any person, probably the person will die. So, they started with the 15 and it may go on and on and on up to 450 volts. It was given, that an instrument was given in front of the participants and they are supposed to press, and that will give shock to the learner. Actually, there was no shock, but participant was not aware about that. So, it is like this, just to give you an example, how in the instrument given, what was the level given to the participant, actual participant, for example, 50 to 60 volt, it was slight shock. When it was given to the actual learner, there was not much reaction, it was tolerable. But when it goes to 75 volt, let us say it is a moderate shock, the participant will show some discomfort. So, the learner was not directly in front, physically in front of the participant, they were in another room and they could hear the sound because there was a connection, the response of the learner. 120 volt, strong shock. The learner complained that shocks are becoming painful, like then 150 it is very strong shock, then the learner actually demands to be released from the experiment. These are all helpers of the experimenter, they were not actually getting any direct shock, but this is what they are behaving like this because they are instructed to do like this, just to see to what extent actually the participant go in terms of giving shocks when it was they are ordered to do so. Like 180 it is very strong shock, the learners actually cried out that cannot stand out this pain and so on, they are behaving like this because they are instructed to behave like that. Then let us say 270 volt, extremely intense shock, they are agonizing, screaming because of the pain, these are all false. 300 volt, intense shock, refuse to answer the question and so on. At the end, like when a 330 above or 450 when volt, there was no further response, silence, as if the person became unconscious or something like this. So, these were some of the response that the learners were giving to the actual participants. So, they were getting feedback, what is the effect of this electric shock on the person. So, they could clearly hear what is happening, and they intentionally gave wrong answer so that the participant actually gives shocks. But they are instructed to do so. So, they are giving wrong answer and the participant was supposed to increase the shock. So, the setup was something like this. So, this was the fake test subject, means these were put by the experimenter and they pretend to feel pain and so on. and they were giving wrong answer, so that the actual participant can give them shock. So this was the actual subject, and they had these shock buttons given from 15 volt to, let's say, 450 volts and so on. Actual experimenter was sitting here, and he was instructing, urging the participant that please go on and on, give the shock because this is necessary and so on. So the experimenter was giving. The actual participant was not physically present in front of the participant. The fake subject was somewhere in another room. So this was the setup. So the learner, who was actually an actor from the actor set up by the experimenter, pretended to feel pain, protested, and eventually stopped responding. So they were asked to behave like that. Whenever the participant hesitated because the person was getting pain and crying and so on, the experimenter gave prompts such as please continue. So they are basically giving orders, please continue, don't stop. The experiment requires that you need to continue this. So probing was given, so that they were trying to see to what extent actually the participant obeys the order. What was the finding? The results were very surprising. About 65% of the participants administered maximum 450 volt shock, because the participant actually believed the shock was given to them, which was not actually given, but they believed, because they did not know that it was all fake and so on. But by believing actual shock, they are giving 65% of the participant actually administered 450 volt, which is fatal, and a person can die because of this kind of shock, and they followed the order. That is very surprising. Many participants showed signs of distress because the person was crying and screaming, but still they obeyed the authority figure. So that shows some kind of disturbing finding in terms of the nature of human beings. What is the conclusion? The experiment showed that ordinary individuals may obey authority even when doing so conflicts with their conscience. Authority figure can direct you to behave in such a way. People are likely to go to this kind of extent also, just to follow the orders of authority, even though their conscience is not allowing it to do. Still they did it. Some other experimenter tried to replicate, because that was done in 1960s. So some researchers thought maybe the people have changed in the recent time. So some people try to replicate the same experiment, although there are certain ethical issues, because nowadays probably you cannot exactly follow the same experimental process because it can harm mentally the participants, and as a researcher you cannot do that. So some form of replication was done later. So many researchers believe that modern individuals would resist this type of authority more than the people in 1960s. So they wanted to replicate that. Stanley Milgram's classic obedience experiment showed strong obedience to authority, as we have seen. Now Jerry M. Berger, 2009, conducted a modern replication test whether obedience levels had changed or not. He tried to replicate the same study with certain changes, because it cannot be done exactly like this in today's world. So he did some modification because of ethical issues. So participants were selected for medical and psychological vulnerability to stress. So they were very vulnerable participants were not selected. So they were tested before whether they have a lot of stress or vulnerability or not. So psychologically healthy individuals were screened and included in the experiment. So the experimenter stopped at 150 volt only. So in the actual Milgram experiment, 450 volt was there. Here maximum 150 volt was given because of ethical issues, when the learner first protested. So in the Milgram experiment, 150 volt was when actually the learner showed the sign of pain and protested that I am feeling it very painful, please stop it and so on. So 150 volt was that threshold. Berger used this limit because Milgram found that participants who passed 150 volt usually continued to the end. So he kept 150 as a threshold because he found in the Milgram experiment, those who went beyond 150, they actually followed till 450. So 150 is a natural indicator that this person will go ahead. Even if there are more bolts, the person will follow that. And in this experiment, both male and female participants were included. Milgram experiment was primarily male participants were there. So these are some of the changes he did. What was the result? Similar experimental process was done, all the other things were same. He also found this high level of obedience was still observed in 2009 whenever it was done. He found about 66.7% of men continued till 150 volts. This experiment was almost same percentage. And 72.7 women continued past 150 volt. So although there is a little difference, but it may be because of chance also. But there are not much significant difference between male and female, almost similar, little different, yeah. Which may not be very significant. So these results were similar to those found in the actual Milgram studies. So even in replication studies found that people have not changed. The similar results were reported. Now obviously in the experiment when disobedient model, somebody who disobeyed and other participant could see that somebody disobeyed, what is the impact of that? So certain other versions of the experiments were also done. So this in that replication study also, when the participant sometimes saw another person refuse to obey the experiment. So that was another condition included in another study. Despite this also, many still continued the shock. Even when somebody, they could see other person, someone else is kind of not showing obedience. Despite there also, some people still continue to give shock and so on. When disobedient model was included, then also 54.5% men obeyed after seeing this, and about 68.4% women obeyed despite witnessing disobedience. So even after seeing that other persons are not obeying, still a lot of people, a large percentage of people, more than 50% of them actually obeyed. So the conclusion from this experiment is that obedience to authority remains very strong even in the modern society also. People may continue harmful action when instructed by authority figures. Berger study supports Milgram original finding about obedience. So this is still valid in the today's world also. We can say that was done in 1960s, probably people have changed, but people have not changed. Why this happens? Why people do such destructive behavior when authority figures tells you to do that? Why this happens? This is a very strong implication in our society. So the findings of Milgram's obedience experiment resemble several real world atrocities, and this is not something only we have seen in the experiments in the lab setting. In the real world, such examples, there are ample evidence of such example when authority figure instructed people to do and they did destructive behaviors like anything. Lot of examples. For example, the Nazi Holocaust, in which millions of Jews and others were murdered by the Nazi regime. And soldiers were instructed and they just killed people without any apparent reason. Millions of Jews were killed because authority figure instructed you, just go and kill them, and they did that. Okay? This is what the experiment also showed. The Rwandan genocide in 1994, where about 8 lakh Tutsis were killed in less than 3 months. These are all because of some authority figure instructed to do that. Mass murders and killings happens. These are all reflection of that. This event raised an important question in society, so in particularly social psychology. Why do ordinary people obey harmful orders when they personally have nothing against those people, but they still do all this destructive behavior? Ordinary people, they are not like some villains or some kind of demons. They are ordinary human individuals. Why do they obey such destructive behaviors? One of them, we'll talk about some of the possible reasons. One is identification with the cause. People are more likely to obey when they identify the goals or purpose of the authority. Whenever they identify with the purpose of the authority figure shows you certain goals and missions, and you identify with that. So whenever he says something just for the missions and the goals, people tend to do that. The modern analog of Milgram type of studies, identification with the goals of the scientific enterprise predicted obedience. So in the Milgram study, the participant identified with the cause of scientific research. So they obeyed the instructions of the authority because they believed it is an important thing for the scientific research and so on. Participants who believed strongly in the importance of the research were more likely to continue delivering shocks and so on, because they identified with the cause. So, a lot of people obey orders from authority figure because they identify with the cause of whatever the vision set by the authority figure. Second is reason why people do that, transfer of responsibility. This is also very important. Authorities often relieve subordinates of responsibility of their action. So, when you follow someone's order, you believe it is not my responsibility. If something happens, it is the authority's responsibility. I am just following the order. So, they don't take responsibility. So, when there is a less responsibility, you can do anything because you are not responsible. So, individuals feels that the authority figure is responsible. I am not responsible if something happens. This leads to the common justification, I was only following orders. They are not taking so responsibility is gone in such situations. So, in the crowd behavior, when a group of people and the mob vandalization happens, collectively people go and kill a lot of people, no one is taking this. Who is responsible? There are so many people, everybody did. Then how do you find out who is responsible? So, because of lack of responsibility or diffusion of responsibility, people many times do a lot of destructive things that the individual will never do. So, in the examples of Milgram experiment, participants were explicitly told that the experimenter was responsible for learners' well-being and so on. They thought whatever will happen, the experimenter knows. We are only following the orders. So, they did follow the orders. So, this is also another important reasons called transfer of responsibility. Then it also depends why sometimes people follow. If there is a legitimacy of the authority, then also obedience increases. Authority figures often display symbols of status and legitimacy such as uniforms, titles, institutional settings. This all create more pressure. That this is an authority figure, has formal dress, titles, institutional setup, then the obedience, the influence increases. These cues activate social norms of obedience, and there is a norm in our society that you should follow the authority order. That gets activated and people follow it, and people believe they should follow instructions from legitimate authorities. For example, in the case of Milgram's experiment, authority figures wore a white lab coat suggesting scientific authority and certain badges. So, participant, that authority figure, that becomes more salient, and there was an institutional setup, lab and so on. So, they thought all these cues kind of facilitated this whole authority figure norms, and they followed them and so on. Then another reason is why people sometimes find it difficult, because there is a gradual escalation of command. Initially the authority is not saying do the extreme thing. They will start with the small demands and then it will escalate, and once you start following, you find it difficult to stop in between. So, that gradual escalation of command is another reason. Harmful obedience often develops through gradual escalation. Authorities first request small, mild actions and then later increases the severity of the demands, and then you find it difficult to stop. For example, in the participants in the Milgram study started delivering very mild shock initially, which looks harmful, and then gradually it increased to potentially dangerous level, and they could not stop many of them. This process is something called as foot in the door technique, which we will talk just in the few upcoming slides. Like you start with the small demands and then increase the demand, then people find it difficult to say no. Then another reason is fast pace of the events. In many situations involving destructive obedience, events unfolds very quickly. Situation may escalate very rapidly and you find it difficult to logically think. Sometimes demonstration turns into riots, arrest turns into beating or killings. Things become so fast and chaotic that people find it difficult to rationally make calculations and make judgments and take actions. So, generally people obey authorities more automatically in such situation because they have no clue what to do. Similar conditions were observed in the experimental conducted by the Stanley Milgram. Participants quickly found themselves in situations where they had to administer electric shock to the learners and they had no clue, so that they just followed it. So, fast pace of the event is also responsible. So, these are some of the reasons why people follow destructive orders from the authority. Now, the last social form of influence is called compliance, and we will see what is compliance and some real life applications, like because this is something very common in day to day's functioning. Compliance is very common. So, compliance means what? It is a type of social influence where individuals changes their behavior in response to the direct request from another person. So, in the context of compliance, there is no authority ordering you. It is just somebody is making request. It is more like peer to peer. Somebody requests you, please do this, and you just yield to that. Then it is called compliance. Okay. So, it is more like a direct request. Obedience was much more stronger. It is an order. Compliance is little less. Here it is a kind of request. You can also deny this. Conformity was much more subtle. No one is even saying anything, but you are just understanding I should behave like this. So, compliance comes somewhere in between. Conformity is the mildest. Compliance then comes, and then the strongest form of social influence comes is obedience. So, unlike conformity, which is following the crowd and the norms, or obedience, which is following direct order from the authority, compliance involves peer to peer request, where somebody requests you, you can technically refuse, but many times we find it difficult to refuse. So, that is compliance. So, it is a common form of social influence in everyday life, because it is very common. Everyday life we come across or encounter so many requests people make, and many times we have to comply with that. So, it is a very common. So, we will see some possible techniques that people follow, and advertiser follow, and so on. So, in that context it will become an application of that also. Some of the classic compliance techniques that people follow, organizations follow, advertisement follow, and so on. Let us see some of the things, some of the techniques that people follow to make request so that people comply. One is called as foot in the door technique. So, it is just name of the technique. What happens here? Here a person makes a small request first and then following it with a larger request. So, this is a technique where people find it to comply, so that people find it difficult to reject such request. So, we will start with a small request, okay? Then people will say it is a very small request, let me do it. Then slowly they will increase the severity of the request. Since you followed, accepted the small one, you find it difficult to reject the other larger request. So, that is called foot in the door technique. So, the psychological principle is consistency. What is consistency here? People like to see themselves as consistent, because I accepted a small request, then you find it difficult to say no in the later request. After agreeing to a small request, people are more likely to agree to a larger request that is related. So, this is called foot in the door technique. It works in many social situations. Some of the examples are like, in the context of marketing, a company offers a free trial subscription, okay? Small, now you do not have to even pay, just go with the free trial. So, you accepted that. Then after the trial period, they will encourage you to buy full membership, and lot of people actually buy that, because to maintain that consistency. Initial was very small request, you do not have to pay anything, but then they will make it, once you get the benefit of it, then you find it difficult to not to subscribe, or there is a kind of pressure builds up that you end up buying full subscription. So, that is an example of foot in the door technique. Second is called door in the face technique. It is just opposite to that, opposite of the first one that we discussed. What happens here? The person begins with a very large request in the beginning, which the person knows will be rejected, because it is a very large request. Then they will come to the smaller request, which they think is actually will be accepted. Here the principle of reciprocity is followed. When someone makes a concession by reducing the initial request, people feel obligated to reciprocate and agreeing, because the person initially made a large request, then a small request. So, it looks like a concession given to you. So, people sometimes find it difficult to say no. For example, in case of fundraising, A volunteer asks you to donate, let's say 5,000 rupees. So, it is a very large request. He also knows probably people will not pay. Then after you refuse, they ask for just give 200, which you may accept, because you feel it is a very small amount and the person is making lot of concession. Then the person is more likely to accept that. So, that is called door in the face technique. The third technique is called lowball technique. What is this? In the lowball technique, a person first gets agreement to a request and then changes the terms to deal with make the deal less attractive. So, they make an agreement as per certain terms and conditions, and then they change the request to, let us say, make certain more profit and so on. Because you already accepted, then you find it difficult to say no. So, here commitment and consistency principles are followed. Once people make a commitment, they generally stick with it even if the condition changes. For example, in case of travel booking, a hotel advertises a cheap room rate. This is very common in the online booking of the hotels and so on. When you look at the website, the rates are very less. Then what happens? After booking, once you are in the payment page, they will, a lot of additional charges will appear. So, actually the rate is much higher. But then you find it difficult to not to buy, because you already started the process and so on. Then generally people say, okay, it is okay. So, this is called lowball technique. Somehow there are hidden terms and conditions which is not displayed initially. So, that is called lowball technique. Fourth technique is called bait and switch technique. What is this? Here customers are attracted by low price product, but when they arrive, the product they say is unavailable or it is not that great product, and they are encouraged to buy something more expensive alternative. So, it is like a bait, small thing they will catch you and then they will say this is not available, you buy this one which is of higher price. So, the target selling is something else, because normally people will not buy that. Here commitment is used, psychological principle. Once people invest time and effort, somebody went there because of by seeing something they spent time and effort, then they say let me buy it because I have spent time and effort. They are more likely to proceed with the purchase. For example, electronics store. A shop advertises a cheap smartphone, let us say. When customers arrive, they are told it is out of stock, but a better, which is more expensive obviously, model is available. So, you come and because then you have to buy, so you generally buy more expensive product. So, this is called bait and switch technique. The fifth technique is called that's not all technique. So, this is another strategy. Here seller add extra benefits before buyer responds. So, there are something else, other benefits. So, you see so many things comes with the product, so you tend to buy it. Here reciprocity is there, the person is giving so many things, some extra things, so you feel like buying it. When sellers appears to offer something extra, buyers feel pressured to accept. A lot of advertisement follows this, TV advertisement. They said this product costs 2,000, but wait, we will also include another one for free. We will give one free product with this product. So, you tend to feel buy this product because you feel extra things are coming up, but generally the cost includes all the cost, but it feels like you are getting something extra. So, that is called that's not all technique. So, these are some of the techniques that people follow in terms of compliance, and not individuals, even companies, advertisement use a lot of these techniques very regularly in their advertisement and so on. So, this has a lot of practical applications in the consumer behavior and so on. So, with this I stop here. Thank you.